A family's door is graced by a lion who arrives with her cub, and what happens next takes them completely by surprise. They can hardly believe their eyes. The tranquil morning in the countryside had only just started. Emily Jensen, a mother of three, peeked through the curtain of the living room, expecting perhaps a wandering animal. Instead, she stumbled back in shock at what she saw, standing just beyond their wooden porch. In the middle of the gravel driveway was a lion, a fully grown lioness. Her golden coat shimmered in the sunlight of the morning. Her muscles were taut, and her eyes were steady, not radiating aggression but intent. However, it wasn't merely the presence of the lion that rendered Emily motionless. Gently clutched in the lioness's jaws was a cub, small, weak, and unmoving. She called for her husband, Mark, who rushed in, disbelief evident on his face. Initially, he thought she was exaggerating until he saw it himself. The lioness wasn't pacing or growling. She wasn't hunting, but waiting, as though she had brought her cub to them for a reason. Mark cautiously stepped out onto the porch, speaking softly in an attempt not to startle the animal. The lioness didn't flinch. She tracked him with her eyes, but there was no sign of fear, no indication of threat. Then, with an almost human-like and deliberate motion, she advanced and placed the limp cub at the edge of the porch before stepping back. Emily was already on the phone with Animal Rescue, her hands trembling, but Mark had moved closer to examine the cub. It was breathing, barely, and trembling too small to be out here alone. Yet somehow, its mother had carried it from the wild to a human home by the time the first rescue truck arrived. The scene appeared more like a scene from a movie rather than real life. A lioness standing sentinel, her sick cub resting at the doorstep of a family that had never anticipated partaking in a miracle. And this was just the beginning. Animal control and rescue experts arrived within minutes. Astonished to discover the reports were accurate, a full-grown lioness was calmly poised before a family's porch, refusing to abandon the cub she had delivered. One of the officers, a seasoned wildlife handler named Lisa, approached slowly, tranquilizer gear in hand. But Emily stepped forward, explaining what they had witnessed. She didn't come to attack. Emily stated firmly, she brought her baby here as if she knew we could help. Lisa had never encountered anything like this. Wild animals didn't behave in this manner, especially apex predators like lions. Yet this one wasn't pacing or acting aggressively. She was simply observing, waiting, and somehow trusting. The rescue team carefully picked up the cub, its breathing shallow and its eyes closed, the body weak with fever, showing clear signs of malnutrition. Lisa turned to her team, saying, "We need to move quickly. This cub won't survive the night without fluids and heat." The moment the cub was lifted, the lioness straightened but didn't lunge forward. Instead, she emitted a low and deep rumble, a plea rather than a threat, and stayed firmly in place while the team carefully transported her baby into the truck. It became clear to everyone present that she wasn't leaving because she didn't trust them. She wasn't departing because her mission was incomplete. The Jensens watched with hearts racing as the rescue vehicle pulled away. Yet the lioness didn't follow. Instead, she turned and settled back down on the grass near the driveway, observing the house, monitoring the people who now held her cub's fate in their hands. As night descended, she remained there. Hours passed, and rain began to fall, but the lioness didn't budge. Emily struggled to sleep. She stood by the window long after midnight, watching the motionless figure in the darkness illuminated only by the porch light and the sporadic flashes of lightning. It was heartbreaking. This wasn't instinct alone. This was something much deeper. The lioness had risked everything, venturing into human territory with a dying cub because she believed someone could help. A question haunted both Emily and Mark now. How did she know where to go? Why them? And would her cub even survive? At the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, tension filled the atmosphere as the tiny lion cub lay on a heated table, swaddled in a soft blanket around its fragile body. Its breathing was irregular, and its heartbeat faint. Veterinarian Dr. Mason Reynolds worked swiftly, inserting a small fore into the cub's leg, while a technician fit an oxygen mask. Mason had encountered critically ill animals before, but this case stood apart, not only because of the cub's dire state, but also due to its extraordinary arrival. Monitoring the vitals, something caught his attention. The cub's coat exhibited unusual discoloration around its belly and sides, a sign of an untreated infection, likely stemming from an old wound. While it wasn't life-threatening by itself, compounded with dehydration and fever, it could have easily turned fatal if left unaddressed for even another day. She brought him just in time, Mason murmured, shaking his head. A few more hours, and we could have lost him. Back at the Jensen residence, the lioness maintained her position at the edge of their property. Animal control established a temporary perimeter, but no one dared to move her. She wasn't hostile, merely heartbreakingly still, her eyes never leaving the house. When Lisa called the center with an update on the cub status, Emily requested they play her voice over the phone near the lioness. Let her know her cub is still alive, she said. Lisa was doubtful but complied. They placed the phone near the edge of the porch and set it to speaker mode. Emily spoke softly. Your baby is okay. He's safe. They're taking care of him. To everyone's astonishment, the lioness didn't respond with growl or roar, but rather with a deep chuff, a sound lions reserve for those they trust. Then she lay her head down on the grass, her ears twitching slightly as if she understood. Meanwhile, back at the center, Mason and his team worked through the night. The antibiotics began to take effect, and by dawn, the cub's temperature had stabilized. While it was still too early to celebrate, the fact that it had survived the night was nothing short of miraculous. Then something even more astonishing occurred. When Mason scanned the cub for a microchip just to be thorough, he found one. The data revealed something no one could have anticipated. The cub had been born in a protected reserve, miles away, in a remote part of the wilderness from which no lion had ever left on its own. This raised questions. How had the lioness traveled so far? And why had she come to the Jensen's door? The answer Mason would soon discover left him and everyone else speechless. The moment Dr. Mason confirmed the cub's microchip registration, he knew something didn't add up. The records indicated that the cub's mother had once been tagged as a rescued lioness, brought in as an injured cub over a decade ago. Her name was Zara, and she had been nursed back to health by a former wildlife volunteer working at the sanctuary, who happened to be Emily Jensen. Mason double-checked the file, then picked up the phone to call Emily. Did you volunteer at the Riverbend Wildlife Reserve about 11 years ago? He asked, his voice taut with disbelief. Yes, she replied slowly. That was a long time ago. I worked with a cub named Zara. She had a leg injury. Why? Mason paused, then continued. Because the lion at your house right now, the one who brought your cub, that's her. There was silence on the other end of the line as Emily sat down, stunned. She had dedicated nearly a year to rehabilitating Zara as a young lioness before she was reintroduced into the wild. She recalled every scar, every moment they bonded, how Zara would curl up beside her in the enclosure during thunderstorms, and how she would respond to Emily's voice. But that was over a decade ago. Zara had vanished into the wilderness like so many others. There was no reason to believe she could even have survived, let alone that she would remember. Yet, against all odds, Zara had somehow remembered the human who once cared for her. When her own cub fell ill, when the wild offered no safety or answers, Zara had trekked miles across unfamiliar terrain to bring her baby to the only person she believed could help. As tears welled in Emily's eyes, she realized this was larger than instinct. It wasn't about mere luck. It was about a mother's love, loyalty, memory, and recognition. She urged Mason to do whatever was necessary to ensure the cub grew strong enough to return home. They owed Zara that much. Mason agreed. Meanwhile, news of Zara's remarkable journey began to circulate. Wildlife experts were baffled. Some dismissed it as coincidence, while others thought it impossible. Yet those who had worked with animals long enough understood better. Certain things in nature aren't always explained, and some bonds run deeper than scientific measurement. Zara had just demonstrated that some connections never fade, regardless of the years that pass. 3 days later, the cub was strong enough to move, not fully recovered, but stable, eating, standing, and letting out small, croaky cries that grew stronger by the hour. Mason had spent every waking moment monitoring its vitals, and the turnaround was nothing short of extraordinary. But now came the question everyone had been dreading. Would Zara accept her cub back after their time apart? Reuniting wild animals isn't always a straightforward matter of opening a gate. If a mother no longer recognizes her cub or senses it carries the scent of humans, she might walk away, or worse, completely reject it. However, Emily refused to believe that awaited them. Zara had risked everything to bring her baby here. She had waited outside their house for 3 nights. Straight. She hadn't forgotten. She wouldn't now. The team loaded the cub into a travel crate cushion with warm blankets and drove back to the Jensen home, where, incredibly, Zara was still waiting. She had shifted to the edge of a nearby field. Never far away, never aggressive, just watchful, waiting. Emily stepped out first, her heart racing. The moment Zara saw her, she rose, head held high, with her tail low but relaxed. Mason opened the crate and gently lifted the cub out. It squirmed in his arms, eyes fluttering open, and then a soft whimper emerged from the cub's tiny throat. Zara's ears perked up, her muscles tensed, not in fear, but in recognition. She moved forward slowly, closing the distance between herself and Emily without hesitation. Then she paused, eyes fixed on her cub. Mason carefully set the cub down and stepped away. What transpired next left everyone in silence. Zara emitted a low, vibrating chuff, the same sound she had used to greet Emily so long ago. The cub responded with a faint mew, and then Zara approached gently, demonstrating the kind of care only a mother could show. She nudged her cub with her nose, licked its face, and lay down beside it, pulling it close with one large paw. Tears flowed freely down Emily's face, and Mason said nothing. There was nothing to be said. No one dared interrupt the moment. Zara hadn't only remembered where to go, she had remembered whom to trust. As the sun began to set behind the hills, painting the sky in soft hues of orange and gold, Zara turned her head once again. Her eyes met Emily's, and though no words were exchanged, the meaning was unmistakable. She had come seeking help, and now she was taking her baby home. The days that followed were peaceful, but a shift had occurred for everyone who witnessed the events. Zara and her cub disappeared back into the forest. Yet before leaving, Emily caught one last glimpse of them, standing at the tree-line early the next morning. Zara didn't approach, didn't linger. She simply stood there, her cub nestled close to her side, and watched the house for a moment. Then, without a sound, she turned and vanished into the trees. Her mission accomplished, word of the remarkable event spread beyond their town. Wildlife experts, media outlets, and animal behaviors sought to explain it. Yet no one could agree on a singular reason. Some labeled it instinct, others referred to it as coincidence. But those who had been present knew it was something more profound. It was trust, a bond formed years ago between a young volunteer and a wounded cub, one that time and distance couldn't erode. Emily kept a photo of Zara from her days at the sanctuary. It now occupied a place on the mantel beside a new one, a blurry snapshot of Zara and her cub walking back into the wild, captured from the porch at the moment they departed. She often gazed at it, still unable to fully comprehend what had transpired. But above all, she felt honored that Zara had remembered, that she had returned. When her own cub's life hung in the balance, she chose to return to the person who had once saved hers. Perhaps this is what makes this story so unforgettable, not just a miracle of survival or the reunion of mother and child, but the quiet yet powerful message behind it all, that love leaves an indelible mark. Trust once earned can last a lifetime. And sometimes, the wild remembers more than we often credit it for.